I walked through the front door feeling like the day had squeezed every last drop of life out of me. You know that kind of exhaustion that crawls under your skin and settles there, making even your own thoughts feel heavy? That was exactly where I was, stuck for hours in traffic, drowning in the noise of honking engines and my own frustration. My shoes practically flew off my feet the second I stepped inside, as if they were begging for mercy. And underneath all of it, my stomach twisted with that painful, hollow kind of hunger. All I wanted was something simple, something warm, something that felt like comfort. Cooking wasn't even an option. I didn't have the strength to lift a pan, let alone stand in front of a stove. So pizza felt like salvation. My own phone was dead and charging in the bedroom, so I reached for Thomas's on the coffee table without a second thought. The way you do when trust feels so normal it becomes invisible. Funny how we never notice the cracks until the whole floor starts shaking. I just needed to make a quick call. That's all. Nothing dramatic. Nothing life-changing. At least, that's what I believed in that innocent, quiet moment. But the second I started dialing, his screen lit up, bright enough to punch through the dim room. The name Medico popped up, and I froze mid-breath. Thomas never mentioned a doctor, not an appointment, not a checkup, nothing. The ringtone vibrated through my hand like a warning I didn't know how to read yet. For a moment, I just stared at it, feeling a strange pressure build in my chest, that instinctive whisper telling you something is wrong before your mind can catch up. And right there, holding that ringing phone, I felt the night shift around me. I answered the call because I thought it might be something urgent, something serious, something a wife should know. But the moment I put the phone to my ear, a woman's voice slipped through, soft, intimate, the kind of tone you use when you're speaking to someone who's yours. "Hi, love. Are we still meeting this week?" she said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. My whole body went still, like someone had cut the wires inside me. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. My heart thudded in my ears so loudly I could barely trust my own breath. "What did you say?" I managed, though my voice came out thin, almost foreign. She giggled, an actual giggle, and asked if I was around. She called him baby. Baby. That word slid under my skin like a blade. I felt something crack inside me, a soundless break that sent heat rushing up my neck. "This is the wife," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in years. There was a sharp gasp, then the line went dead, leaving me holding the phone like it was burning my hand. For a moment I couldn't move. I just stared at my reflection in the black screen, as if I needed to confirm I was still real. Then everything inside me erupted at once. My pulse hammered, my vision blurred at the edges, and the room felt too small to hold the storm rising in my chest. I didn't even realize I'd started shouting until I heard my own voice bouncing off the walls, calling Thomas's name like a warning siren. I stormed toward the bedroom, each step powered by betrayal and disbelief. My hands shook, my breath came in sharp bursts, and the only thing I could think was, how long has he been lying to me? I didn't have the answer yet, but I was about to rip it out of him. I found Thomas in the bedroom, calmly folding laundry like the world was perfectly intact. That sight alone sent a fresh wave of disbelief crashing over me. How could he move so casually while my entire reality had just been set on fire? My heart was pounding so hard it almost drowned out my own voice, but I forced the words out anyway. I needed him to look at me. I needed him to see the damage in my eyes, even if he pretended not to understand it yet. Betrayal has a strange way of sharpening everything. The air, the light, even the colors in the room seemed too bright. When he finally turned toward me, I felt my anger and heartbreak collide in my chest. I demanded answers, raw, messy, unfiltered. The kind that come from a place you didn't even know existed until someone tore something sacred apart. He stared at me with confusion that felt almost theatrical, like he was flipping through a script he hadn't rehearsed well enough. A part of me hoped desperately that this was some misunderstanding, some ridiculous mix-up. But deep down, a heavier, older part of me knew better. My instincts had been whispering for months. I just hadn't wanted to listen. As I stood there, chest tight, hands shaking, I realized I was standing at the edge of something life-altering. The kind of cliff you don't climb back up once you fall. And even though I didn't know the full truth yet, I could feel it circling me like a shadow waiting to reveal its shape. I didn't know that in the next moments, the ground I was standing on would give way completely. I didn't know how deep the betrayal really ran, but I could sense it, and it was enough to steal the breath from my lungs as the night prepared to break open. The moment I burst into the room, the words flew out of me before I could restrain them. I didn't enter like a wife. I entered like a storm that had finally broken. "Who is she, Thomas? Who's the doctor calling you love?" My voice shook, but it didn't weaken. It carried every sleepless night, every strange gut feeling I'd buried deep, every small moment I'd brushed off because I wanted to believe we were still solid. He turned toward me slowly, his face twisted in confusion that felt too clean, too practiced. And something inside me recoiled, because innocence shouldn't look rehearsed. He told me to calm down, and hearing those words, those infuriating, dismissive words, ignited something fierce in me. Calm down. As if my heart wasn't still pounding from that woman's voice in my ear, as if the ground under my feet weren't splitting open. I shouted back, refusing to shrink for his comfort, refusing to swallow my rage. He went quiet then, but not the way I expected. It wasn't guilt, it wasn't fear. It was something heavier, something that looked a lot like dread. For a moment, I could see him drift away inside his own head, preparing for an inevitable blow. Then he sighed, slow, defeated, like a man finally giving up a secret he'd dragged for miles. I could feel the air tighten between us, thick enough to choke on. "There's something you need to know," he said, and my whole body braced as if instinctively trying to protect itself. I told him to say it, even though part of me didn't want to hear a single word. But the truth was already rising, already shaping itself in the shadows of his expression. And as I stood there, breath shaky, heart trembling, I felt the first ripple of the twist that was about to turn my life inside out. When the words finally left his mouth, they didn't just land, they detonated. "She's my ex, Julie." Hearing her name, a name I hadn't spoken in years, felt like swallowing ice. My knees actually threatened to give out, and I had to steady myself on the edge of the dresser just to stay upright. I stared at him, trying to stitch his confession into something that made sense, but nothing fit. Nothing. "Your ex?" I repeated, my voice barely more than a breath. "You saved her number as doctor?" The anger in me simmered into something sharper. Clarity. Because people hide only what they're ashamed of. He rushed into excuses, flimsy and desperate, saying he knew how it would look, saying he didn't want me to misunderstand. But betrayal doesn't need translation. It speaks fluently on its own. I told him exactly what I saw, exactly what any woman would see. Cheating. He opened his mouth again, and this time his whole body deflated before the words escaped him. "Julie is pregnant," he said. The room tilted, the air thinned. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and pulled everything out in one motion. I couldn't even speak. My silence wasn't calm. It was shock in its purest form. "And she says it's mine," he added, his voice so small it barely reached me. That was the moment my world cracked open. Not loud, not dramatic. Quietly, like glass fracturing under pressure you didn't know was there. My heartbeat echoed in my ears, drowning everything else. I remember blinking, just blinking, trying to focus on one object in the room so I wouldn't collapse. Betrayal has a scent, a temperature, a weight, and in that instant it wrapped around me completely. I wasn't just hearing a confession. I was watching the life I knew crumble right in front of me, piece by piece. I don't remember sitting down, but somehow I did. My body felt disconnected from the rest of me, moving on instinct while my mind tried to make sense of the impossible. I looked at Thomas, really looked at him, and all I could see was the man who had shattered every promise he once swore came naturally to him. I wanted to scream, to break something, to crumble into 1,000 pieces. But instead, all I felt was this cold, steady stillness settling inside me, the kind that comes when pain becomes too big to express. It was like watching a storm through a window, knowing you can't stop a single drop. He tried to reach for me then, his hand lifting as if he believed physical contact could glue together what he'd just destroyed. I pulled away before he even touched me. The distance between us felt wider than ever, not measured in steps, but in lies. In moments I didn't know were betrayals until now. My chest ached, a deep, bruised ache that spread with every breath I took. I kept asking myself the same question. When did my marriage turn into a story I didn't recognize? But no answer came. Only the echo of his confession replaying like a cruel loop. As I stared at him, something inside me shifted, subtle but undeniable. The heartbreak didn't disappear, but it began to change shape. It became sharper, more focused, like a blade being forged. I could feel the beginning of something rising inside me, something that didn't look like despair anymore. It looked like clarity. And in that clarity, I sensed the edge of the next step forming, even though I didn't know yet where it would lead. But I knew one thing. The woman I was before this moment would never return. And the woman standing in her place was about to decide exactly how this story would unfold. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't even cry. Instead, an eerie calm washed over me, the kind that feels almost supernatural, like my body knew I'd already bled enough on the inside. I stood there, steady and frighteningly quiet, while Thomas watched me with wide, unsure eyes. "How long?" I asked, and my own voice startled me. It sounded controlled, measured, as if someone else were speaking through me. He whispered, "A few months," and with those words, the small thread tethering us together snapped completely. Months. He had lived a second life for months while sharing a bed with me. Why her? Why now? I asked. Not because I needed the excuse, there is no answer that justifies betrayal, but because I wanted to hear him say it, to hear the shape of his lies out loud. He mumbled something about reconnecting by accident, and I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh. A cold, broken one that didn't even sound human. "You don't fall into someone's bed by accident," I told him, and watching his face crumble under those words felt like the first real moment of truth in the entire night. I saw guilt, fear, and something else. Regret, but not the kind that saves anything. When he tried to take my hand, something inside me recoiled so fast it felt like muscle memory. I stepped back before he even touched me, guarding myself with a distance that was long overdue. "Pack your things," I said, my voice flat, steady, final. He stammered, pleading, but I cut him off with a simple, "I'm not done speaking." Because I wasn't. Because for the first time, the power in the room shifted toward me, not him. He looked at me like he didn't recognize who I had become, and maybe he was right. Something had ignited inside me. Something sharp, strategic, and done being naive. I walked to my computer with a steadiness that scared even me. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My breath wasn't uneven. It was as if my body had slipped into a new state. Survival, maybe, or something deeper. I opened my email and stared at the screen, letting the cold glow settle over me like armor. I began forwarding everything I had quietly collected for months. Hotel charges that never matched his stories, restaurant receipts for dinners I was never invited to, late-night Uber logs that made no sense. I hadn't wanted to believe any of it before. But now it all snapped perfectly into place. Each click felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Text messages, bank transfers, small transactions that spelled out an affair in perfect, undeniable clarity. I sent them all to my lawyer friend, the one who always told me, half-jokingly, to pay attention when something felt off. I had ignored those instincts for far too long. Every forwarded document was a reminder that my heart had seen the truth long before my mind admitted it. And strangely, with each email sent, I felt lighter. Not happy, not relieved, just free from the fog that had been clouding me for so long. Then I picked up the phone and made the call I never imagined making. "It's time," I told her, my voice calm, low, unshakable. "I want everything he legally owes me." There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause filled with both respect and anticipation. "Then let's destroy him," she said. And hearing those words didn't make me guilty. It made me certain. This wasn't revenge out of spite. This was justice carved from broken trust. And for the first time since the call from Doctor, I felt something warm rise inside me. Not joy, but strength, steady and rising like dawn. When I stepped back into the bedroom, Thomas was sitting on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, his face buried in his hands. He looked like a man watching the collapse of a life he thought he controlled. but I didn't rush to comfort him. Not this time. I stood in the doorway, feeling taller than I ever had, like the truth had given me new bones. He lifted his head when he sensed me there, his eyes red and pleading, as if the performance of regret might undo the damage he'd done. But nothing in me softened. Not anymore. I had crossed an internal line I couldn't uncross. He whispered my name, and for the first time it sounded small to me, hollow, almost unfamiliar. I realized that somewhere between the phone call and this moment, I had stopped being the woman who waited for explanations. I had become someone else entirely. Someone who recognized the power of silence. Someone who understood that heartbreak can either break you or sharpen you, and mine had chosen the latter. I told him again to pack his things. This time my voice didn't waver. It didn't crack. It was a straight line. Firm, final, unmistakable. As he stared at me, searching for the version of me who would forgive him, I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over my chest. The kind that feels like standing at the edge of a new life, just before the first step forward. I didn't know what the next days would look like, but I knew what they wouldn't look like. This betrayal. This limbo. This version of us. Something inside me was already moving, already reaching toward the next chapter with a fierce kind of purpose. And as I turned away from him, I felt the unmistakable beginning of the path I was about to take. The next morning, I woke up with a strange sense of clarity, the kind that comes after a storm tears everything apart and leaves only what matters standing. I made coffee, steady and unhurried, letting the quiet wrap around me like a new beginning. Then I did something even I hadn't expected when I first opened my eyes. I invited Thomas's parents over. My voice on the phone was sweet, polite, perfectly composed, the kind of tone that makes people think everything is normal. But inside me, something sharper was moving with intention, guiding every choice I made. When they arrived, they greeted me with warm smiles, unaware that the truth was about to land between us like a lightning strike. I led them into the living room, offering coffee, making soft conversation, all while Thomas hovered nearby, looking pale and uneasy. He didn't know what I had planned, but he could feel it, the shift, the power, the quiet precision of everything unfolding. His eyes kept darting toward me, pleading without words, but I didn't acknowledge him. Not yet. There's a moment in every reckoning when silence holds more weight than any scream could. Then, with the gentleness of someone sharing family photos, I set my laptop on the table and pressed play. The recorded phone call echoed through the room, that woman's voice dripping with affection, calling him love, asking if his wife was around. Thomas's mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while his father's face hardened like stone. I watched them absorb the truth, each second tightening the knot of consequences around Thomas's neck. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt a quiet satisfaction bloom inside me. Not revenge exactly, but justice making itself known. Thomas tried to speak, but his voice wavered, cracking under the weight of the evidence laid out in front of his parents. Before he could form a single excuse, I projected the next piece. Screenshots of messages, the ones dripping with affection and plans and lies he thought would stay hidden. His mother's trembling voice filled the room. Thomas, tell me this isn't true. She looked at him the way a mother looks at a stranger wearing her son's face. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Not sympathy, but validation. Because betrayal doesn't just break a wife, it collapses an entire circle of trust. His father stood abruptly, the chair scraping across the floor, sharp and accusing. He stared at Thomas with eyes full of disappointment, the kind that bruises more deeply than anger ever could. You humiliated your wife, your mother, this family, he said, each word hitting harder than the last. Thomas kept shaking his head, mumbling, reaching for explanations that evaporated before they left his mouth. And all I did was stand there, calm, steady, unmovable. The woman he had underestimated one time too many. Every piece of truth I revealed tightened the noose of his own choices, and he knew it. Then I delivered the final blow. The pregnancy, the texts about appointments, the bank transfers labeled as help, the ultrasound photo he had pretended never existed. His mother broke down. His father looked at him as if he didn't know him at all. And Thomas? He just stood there, hollow, stripped of every lie he'd once wrapped himself in. That was when I placed the divorce papers on the table, sliding them toward him like an overdue bill. "Sign them," I said quietly, "or I'll take this to court, and everyone will know." For a moment, he hesitated, but only for a moment, because even he could see his empire of lies had nowhere left to stand. Thomas's hands trembled as he picked up the pen. I watched him, steady and unflinching, while his parents stared at him like he was a stranger they'd never invited into their lives. The silence in the room was heavy, almost suffocating, broken only by the faint scratch of the pen moving across paper. That sound felt like closure, sharp, deliberate, final. He didn't look at me while he signed. He couldn't. And honestly, I didn't want him to. I wanted him to feel every ounce of the collapse he had built with his own bare hands. When he pushed the papers toward me, his eyes glistened, the kind of shine a man gets when he realizes he's lost something he assumed would always be there. But I didn't take the bait of softening. Betrayal doesn't earn compassion. Truth doesn't require patience. I simply gathered the documents, placed them neatly in a folder, and thanked his parents for coming, with the same polite tone I'd use after any ordinary family visit. His mother wiped her eyes. His father squeezed my shoulder, a silent apology that wasn't his to give, but that landed gently anyway. I appreciated it more than I expected. As for Thomas, he lingered near the doorway, trying to form words, trying to reach for the version of me that would have comforted him once. But that woman was gone, burned away by the truth he'd forced me to confront. I walked past him without a second glance, feeling lighter, as if shedding his lies had freed something deep inside me. And even though the chapter wasn't fully closed yet, I could feel its ending approaching, a quiet shift in the air hinting at the final step I still had to take before I stepped into the life that waited on the other side. I moved into my new apartment with nothing but a few boxes, a rented couch, and a version of myself I was still getting to know. The place was small, quiet, almost too quiet at first, but it felt like mine in a way our old house never truly had. I remember standing in the middle of the living room on my first night there, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, and realizing that silence, when it isn't filled with lies, can actually feel like peace. I breathed in slowly, letting the stillness settle over me like a warm blanket. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt safe inside my own life. Days passed, and I started creating little routines: morning coffee by the window, evening walks around the block, long showers where I let the steam wash away the last traces of who I used to be. Healing didn't look dramatic. It looked ordinary. It looked like breathing without waiting for the next disappointment. I learned how to fill the space with my own presence, how to enjoy the solitude instead of fearing it. Every room in that apartment held a new beginning, and I walked through each one slowly, touching the walls, grounding myself in the promise of freedom. Then one evening, as I lit a candle and settled into the couch with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, there was a knock on the door. A single, hesitant knock that cut through the calm I'd been nurturing. My heart didn't panic, but it did tighten, because some knocks don't need names to reveal the person behind them. I opened the door, and there he was, Thomas, disheveled, eyes swollen, standing in the hallway like a man who finally realized the cost of his own destruction. And in that moment, I understood that the final closure I needed wasn't behind me yet. It was standing right there, waiting to be delivered. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there with tears streaking down his face, the same face I once trusted more than anything. "Pamela, please," he finally whispered, his voice cracking like brittle glass. There was a time when that sound would have undone me, but now it barely stirred the air around us. I leaned against the doorframe, steady and unmoved, watching him struggle to form the words he'd rehearsed all the way over. "I made a terrible mistake," he said, choking on regret. "But betrayal isn't a mistake. It's a decision, a series of them, and I wanted him to feel the weight of every single one." He kept talking, desperate, unraveling in front of me. He said he missed me, said Julie was only after money, said everything had gotten out of control. His excuses piled up at my feet like discarded promises, and none of them reached me. "Not my problem," I told him, my voice calm enough to startle even myself. Because it wasn't. Not anymore. His chaos wasn't mine to manage. His choices weren't mine to heal. He looked at me like he was seeing this truth for the first time, like he finally understood what losing me actually meant. Not noise, not drama, but silence. A door he couldn't reopen. "Please forgive me," he said, and those 3 words floated in the air between us like smoke. Thin, fading, meaningless. I took a breath, feeling the strength I'd been building rise in my chest like a wave. Forgiveness wasn't mine to give. Not to him. Not for this. "I don't forgive trash," I said, meeting his eyes without flinching. His face crumpled, fully, painfully, and I let him stand in that moment, in the reality he created. Then I stepped back and closed the door. No slam, no theatrics. Just a soft click, sealing my freedom on the right side of the frame and leaving his consequences on the other. The moment the door latched, a quiet settled over me. Not empty, not lonely, but whole. I stood there for a beat, my hand still resting on the doorknob, feeling the echo of the choice I had just made. It wasn't the door closing on him that mattered. It was the door opening back to myself. I walked into the living room, the soft glow of my candle flickering like it understood what had just shifted inside me. I sank into the couch, pulling the blanket over my legs, and let out a deep breath that felt like it had been trapped in my body for years. A breath that tasted like freedom. For the first time in so long, I caught my reflection in the dark window and didn't see the woman who had been shrinking to hold a marriage together. I saw someone standing back up, someone rebuilding, someone who had been pushed to the edge and decided not to fall, but to step into her own life with both feet. My smile came slowly, hesitant at first, then real, warm, steady. I realized I wasn't smiling because Thomas was gone. I was smiling because I was finally back. And that feeling wrapped around me like a quiet victory song only I could hear. I curled deeper into the couch, letting the warmth of the room settle around me. My revenge hadn't been loud or destructive. It had been simple, precise, and devastating in all the right ways. I didn't ruin him. I revealed him. I didn't scream. I spoke truth. And I didn't beg for closure. I created it. Now, with my life stretching ahead of me, peaceful, unclaimed, fully mine, I felt a steady certainty rise inside me. I had taken back my dignity, my voice, my future. And as the night settled softly around me, I knew one thing for sure. This was only the beginning of the life I was finally free to live.